First of all, if you listen to the budget that was presented by the finance minister, you would get the sense that this is an outright freeze with no exception. But there's one exception. The exception is where there is a critical case to be made, then they will consider to employ. But then the question then arises, what is very critical? And who defines that? How will the agency requiring the employment justify that they have a critical need that requires employment, and who will adjudicate on this to make the final decision? Yes, it is critical, employ. No, it is not. So it just throws up a whole host of challenges to the way we've employed already. In effect, it will put a freeze on all employments, right? In the past, when we've gone to the IMF, at least the last time we went to the IMF, there was a small caveat called net freeze, which in essence just simply says that you will not employ unless the incumbent employee has exited employment. In other words, if the person goes on pension, if the person resigns, retires, dies, whatever it is that gets him to vacate his post permanently, then you replace. That is a net freeze. Then you replace. That was the IMF condition. Well, not an IMF condition, but that is what we proposed to the IMF. IMF, of course, prodded us, and we agreed in 2015 when we got the last deal. That was manageable then, because then, of course, you have a situation where there are gaps, right, in a sector. So take the health sector. A doctor working in a public service, in a public hospital, who retires or who resigns or for whatever reason vacates his post permanently. Under the 2015 program, the government would have hired somebody to replace him. But under this, that won't happen unless that agency can prove that it's a very critical case that's been made. And so that throws up a whole different, but there's a reason for this. Where we are currently, where our economy is currently, it's unprecedented. This country have never witnessed such economic rot before. And so we are in uncharted territory, not business as usual. Nothing is normal anymore. And hence we are having to face unprecedented measures that will impose a lot of pain on sectors, on people, etc. Because you can imagine when the doctor isn't there and you have to replace immediately, but you can't. You have to now go and justify that it's critical, the time that, you know, the gap there, what happens to the patients who need critical care immediately. So there are a lot of questions there that we need to interrogate. We need to save the economy, but in doing so, how many lives possibly are we going to possibly have to compromise to achieve that? So very serious fundamental questions we intend to probe as far as this issue is concerned. But why is government having to do this? Because the fundamental challenge we are facing are twofold. One is compensation, the burden of the wage bill on the economy and what we're paying to investors as an interest rate to service our debt. So if you isolate compensation for employees, for example, for 2023, government is projecting to spend 44.99 billion cedis to pay workers, right? And this is an increase from 35 billion. The interesting thing that I'm noticing, if you look at the data from previous IMF programs or periods when we went to the IMF, it appears to be the very first time we're going to the IMF that we're going to see such a significant increase in the wage bill nonetheless. That in itself is an interesting point, but that's not why we're here tonight. So that problem is why government says, let's put a freeze on employment. The hope is that when you do that, then you're going to control the wage bill. You're not going to reduce it. You will control it. You're not going to increase it beyond what you are projecting. You just keep it constant. But is that enough? Is a key question to ask. How much of a dent will that make to the current crisis that we are having? And again, you look at the wages, salaries, question. If you break this down from the 44.99 billion, we're talking about wages and salaries social contributions amounting to 38 billion cedis. And then pensions will take, and other payments will take the rest of the 6.26 billion cedis that's there. That gives you the total of 44.99 billion, right? So that's a total. The government said this is too big. We've always known that. There's something wrong with our wage bill that keeps on draining everything else out. Immediately we put it in. But the other thing that I want you to draw attention to, that we've tried to chart, is what had happened during IMF program periods and non-IMF program periods when it comes to the wage bill, right? The adjustments of the employees and the percentage change in how much government is spending on wage. If you look at, so what you see in red there will be what they spent on during the time of IMF bailout. This key here is wrong. It's supposed to be a blue, but I would walk you through, which is what this is one of the things that we know about. I'll walk you through it. If you come to 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, this all IMF period, right? We were in IMF program. You'll begin to see that the wage bill increase, the cumulative increases were recorded. So from 15, right? From 15, 16, 18, and then they begin to drop in 2018 and 2019 when we just exited the last IMF program. And then you come to 2020 when there was no IMF program, right? When there was no IMF program. Then you see that the wage bill percentage increase jumped to 27%. So you were free now, after you exited the IMF program, to come back to a place where you can begin to pay workers more. That's why we saw this huge jump in the percentage change in the wages that we're paying to paying to workers in the public and civil servants from 13 to 27%. Then you're getting into 2021, where the red signs as far as the economy is concerned began to blink. And then you begin to see the percentage change is a steep drop, right? 13% increase was pretty small, and then you go to 2022, and then what government is projecting to spend now in 2023 is 25% increase in the wage bill from this year. Now, the interesting thing I want you to pay attention to is this projected increase, this 25% increase, is projected at the time when government hasn't agreed yet how much percentage they are going to add on for workers for 2023. They haven't agreed the base pay. Workers are asking for a 60% increase in your salaries. Government is offering 12%. They haven't reached an agreement, but the government has presented a budget and is projecting to spend 44.99 billion cedis, which represents a 25% increase in the wage bill if you compare to this year. The question is, what percentage increase in salary? Obviously, government is planning to spend more on salaries and wages, right? But what percentage did the government use in arriving at the 44.99 billion projection when they have not agreed an increase, a percentage increase with the workers? So that is a very interesting dynamic. And I wonder when the workers themselves, the TUC who will join us, when they look at the numbers, can they hazard a guess what percentage government has used to calculate this 44.99 billion cedis they plan to spend on wages? It's definitely not 60%. It can be. If it's 60%, it will be way higher than 44.99%, right? It's even not 40%, not 30%. We are guessing it's anything between 10 and 20%. 10 and 20%, which is what government has used in computing this 44.99 billion they plan to spend the next year, which represents a 25% increase in the wage bill from this year going to 2023. So the workers will give me their reaction to this, because this tells them where government, they already projected, right? And when you do projections, you don't want to exceed that, because it will blow the budget completely out of kilter. So this is possibly the upper limit government can contain in 2023. It tells you something. Government has already decided in their heads what they plan to give the workers. We'll get the workers to give us a sense of this, while employment will also remain the same. But then the big question, you're putting a freeze on employment because you don't want to, blow your, your wage bill out of gear, right? So how many workers are already in the system and you plan to remain constant? 700,000 of them include doctors, teachers, nurses, and other workers, right? So going for the next 3 years, I must add, the government is saying we won't employ any more teachers, we won't employ any more doctors, we won't employ any more nurses, and a whole host of other public and civil servants. The key question is, will they employ more people at the office of government machinery, the presidency, etc.? Will they bring in all political hands more there and keep the doctors' numbers constant? That is always where the tension has been. But that is the whole idea of a freeze on employment. The TUC has been reacting to this. And something caught my attention what the TUC says. Apparently, the TUC has an agreement with government when they were agreeing that meager 4% and 7% increase in your salaries, in your wages for 2022 and for 2021 and 2022, a condition for them agreeing this was that you will continue to employ young people into the public service. If that is true, then possibly this latest agreement to freeze employment may be in violation of that agreement. But I also asked that if this condition, right, was based on a 2021-2022 7 and 4% increase, then possibly that agreement that expires at the end of this year, so it doesn't apply to 2023. We'll get the TUC to give me a sense of what they think of that. And then if you go back to 2025, if you don't learn from history, it's difficult to appreciate how you can succeed going forward. Especially as a country that keeps almost every 5 years on the average, we go back to the IMF because we really don't learn from what we've done in the past in running down the economy, going back to the IMF, taking the prescriptions, getting back on our feet only to fall again. So if you go back to 2015 IMF program, similar measures were introduced. More extensively, we had payroll cleanup because there were a lot of ghost names. We've done systematically over the period using biometric, worker, staff data, etc., to clean it up. It was an IMF condition then. I mean, IMF condition is such an outmoded expression now, but it was part of the deal to get the IMF program. Also, bring the wage bill to revenue ratio down by 53 to 35%. I don't know where we are currently on this, so I'll leave that. But then freeze on public sector employment was another one. So does that ring a bell? Does it sound similar? Does it sound familiar to you? Yes, it is in the 2023 budget as well. So the prescriptions are known when we are going to the IMF. It happened in 2015. In 2015, there was also an addition of a freeze on public sector wage increases, which was very contentious by itself. We're not seeing that now. But here is where the controversy really lies. You are putting a freeze on public and civil, service employment freeze for public and civil servants. But is that where the problem really is in terms of the burden on the wage bill, right? Let's break this down. Article 71 office holders, the average Article 71 office holder is taking 18,000 CDs, 18,211 CDs average. The average civil servant on the single spine salary structure is taking 1,128 CDs. Look at the difference, 17,000 CDs. So the burden, is it fair to say it's on civil and public servants, and so you are holding them constant for the next 3 years and not employing even when people retire, they go on pension, resign, or are sacked? So you will replace until they can justify that. There's a critical reason for it, especially if you look at these numbers according to the 2020 Emoluments Committee. If you look at the highest earner for Article 71 office holder, they are taking home 29,000 CDs, right? This is it, the highest. And the single, spine salary structure is 4,000. right? And then you go to the least earner, 11,000, and you come to 127. This is as of 2016, I must emphasize. So just put that in context. This is as of 2016. And so let's put that in context, right? These numbers have changed over time, but we're looking at the 2016 numbers to make the argument here. And as you move forward into the current circumstance, these numbers don't change. The gaps, the disparity don't change. It's huge still, but we are dealing with the 2015, 2016 case, right? So that's what we have here. And in real terms, you talk about the what we saw in the 2017, 2020 reports. These are jaw-dropping numbers if you put this before any civil and public servant. So keeping them honest tonight, yes, we are freezing employment, but are we sharing the burden equally across the board in saving this economy as we approach the IMF? Let's have an honest conversation about this with the workers themselves and interrogate this going forward here on PMS just after the break.